from our wallets to through rates to paying them, and so we feel that they're quite responsible to us. Whereas, for example, government departments in Wellington, if take the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, well, who knows what they do, whether they're efficient or not. We wouldn't have a clue, but local government is right in our sights, and we are concerned about it.
Yes.
They, I think, have some extra issues.
Yeah, you're making very good points. Thank you for joining us too, Professor Charles Crothers. Yes, you're on a hiding to nothing when you ask for an approval survey about local bodies, aren't you, really?
Yeah, who's ever happy?
Nonetheless, and I didn't have the chance to say the good professor, but nonetheless, there seems to be a widespread feeling, not only amongst developers and the like, but also amongst ordinary citizens who try and get things done around their houses, that there is a huge amount of bureaucracy and it's incredibly expensive to try and get things done. And I don't think people are making that up. I don't think that's just bashing local authorities. That seems to be the way everybody feels at the moment.
Yes. And again, people who feel that way are texting and Gary agreeing with that.
Of course there would be.
Yes, of course there would be. On the eve of the Democrats' convention, why Canadian newspaper proprietor, British peer, convicted fraudster, Conrad Black, thinks Trump will win. Abridged. Here we go. Do you agree with this? Hillary Clinton is carrying more baggage than the Queen Mary, and Trump will carpet bomb the country with $1 billion of reminders of her less than consistent past. American presidential politics is a jungle. The nominees are great beasts, but Donald Trump is larger and fiercer. In taking over a major US political party from the outside, he's done something that's never been done before, and he will win.
I think he might sadly be right. I really hope he's not. But I think I actually understand Donald Trump now. A friend of mine sent me an article from a journalist called Laurie Penny, and she was talking about this guy, Milo Yiannopoulos, who has recently been banned from Twitter for racist and sexist attacks on the actress Leslie Jones. I'd never heard of him, but anyway. But she's talking about how he believes in nothing and comparing him with Donald Trump. And she said they are pure antagonists, unencumbered by any conviction, apart from their personal entitlement to raw power and stacks of cash. And that really rings true. Donald Trump believes in nothing except in Donald Trump, right? So he doesn't give a toss about anything. He's up there flinging insults. If you are a person who actually has convictions and deep felt convictions, like presumably Hillary Clinton, you cannot win an argument with someone who cares about nothing. And that, it makes so much sense to me.
It's a dark view of Trumpland.
But don't you think it sounds plausible? And actually, I thought, well, why do so many people believe this? Why do so many people, why does it appeal to so many people? But I think that maybe they mistake it for strength, that conviction in nothing and not giving a toss about anything.
I could hear Gary agreeing with you as you went.
It comes across as strength, and that's why they like him. And I think that I finally understand it, and it scares me.
Yeah,
it really does.
I mean, I think, this is a tipping point for America now. It is the redneck, relatively uneducated, dissatisfied, huge rump of America that is speaking up now. And you're right. I mean, I think you're right, Nikki, that people want strength. I mean, that's why we had Muldoon for so long. It didn't matter what stupid things Muldoon said or how much gin he had consumed before certain debates late at night. People liked the fact that they were Rob's mob, and Rob knew what was going on, even though Rob didn't really know what's going on and just about drove the country into bankruptcy. So Donald Trump is much the same. But this will be an interesting test of whether or not the United States of America can fight back from ignorance and bigotry and all the other terrible things that tends to afflict a large country like that. And I'm keeping my fingers and my toes and my eyes crossed, hoping that it won't happen, that Donald Trump, God help us, might become President of the United States of America.
Conrad Black's last point's interesting. I mean, the Republicans arguably could not have won unless completely disrupted, as they have been, because the demographics were moving against them. And who knows, they may be moving against Trump. We don't know yet, but he's right about that aspect of things.
Yeah.
It's been a major achievement even in itself. Gary McCormick, thank you very much. Always very nice to have you on.
Thank you, Jim.
And the same applies to you, Nikki Bazant. Thank you for coming on.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And coming up, as always, Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone, I'm John Campbell. Haere mai, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tau te maira, e hoa mā, he kōrero kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te kara whiua. Tonight, Todd McClay apologises to the PM for not telling him more about the thing he initially said he didn't know anything about. The latest from Kabul, where a suicide attack has left 80 people dead. In US, the Democrats and the emails that cost the chair of the National Committee her job and very publicly put the dis in front of unity. A home in Nelson full of rubbish, maggots, faeces and filth. When SIFs were told children were living there, why was nothing done? A predator-free New Zealand by 2050. We're joined live by Maggie Barry, who'll tell us how, and Steve Hansen, whose winning record as an All Black coach is over 90%, is staying on. He'll tell us why and about getting better. All of that and more between now and 6:30, but we begin with Katrina Batten and RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The Prime Minister says he still has confidence in his Trade Minister over his handling of reports of trade retaliation by China over possible steel dumping. The Trade Minister has apologised to John Key for his initial response to reports of trade retaliation by China over possible steel dumping. Todd McClay's version of events has also changed again. He now says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has been assessing the veracity of the allegations for the past few months. Mr Key says he still has full confidence in Todd McClay.
I wouldn't expect his resignation, but I think it's a matter of good practice of the government to try and make sure that we are clear in what we're saying.
John Key says Todd McClay did give the wrong impression about whether the government officials were aware of the reports. The government has adopted the goal of New Zealand becoming predator-free by 2050. Rats, possums, stoats and feral cats will be targeted. The government will invest $28 million in a new joint venture company called Predator Free New Zealand Limited, which will be set up by the beginning of next year. The Conservation Minister, Maggie Barry, says fencing off parts of the country could be a way to do it, but that would be a false way of achieving the goal.
To achieve this Apollo walk of ours, we need to be able to make all of New Zealand predator-free, and we need to do some of it without fences, using technology that doesn't even exist at the moment. But the predator-proof fences are certainly where it started, but it isn't where it will end.
Maggie Barry says the Poison 1080 will still have to be used to get to the hard-to-reach places. A man has set off an explosive device outside a music venue in southern Germany, killing himself and injuring at least 12 people. It's the third violent attack in the state of Bavaria in the last week. The German Interior Minister earlier said the man had tried to commit suicide twice before. The BBC's Steve Jackson reports.
The blast happened in the city of Ansbach, where 2,500 people were attending a music festival. The Bavarian Interior Minister said a 27-year-old Syrian man detonated explosives near the entrance to the event after being refused admission. Concertgoers were evacuated, and much of Ansbach is now cordoned off. Police say their top priority is to find out how the man got hold of the explosives and how he was able to set them off. Officials say his motives are not known, but confirm that he was denied asylum in Germany a year ago and was instead given temporary leave to remain.
Steve Jackson reporting. The High Court in Auckland has heard evidence that the Ministry for Primary Industries was itself thinking of going to court to clarify the legality of swamp kauri exports. The Far North Environmental Protection Society has asked the court to rule on the matter in a judicial review. It believes the ministry has misinterpreted the Forests Act and unlawfully allowed logs and dressed timber out of the country by defining them as stumps and tabletops. The Society's lawyer, Davy Salmon, says that the ministry documents show its officials had serious doubts about the exports 5 years ago and had considered asking for a judicial review to clarify the law. He said ministry officials had also queried the export of logs, saying they exceeded the legal definition of stumps. A Taranaki beach settlement is in clean-up mode again after storm surges washed up rotting animal carcasses and tossed huge logs through fences. East Beach residents in Waitara say they feel abandoned by the local authorities and fear for their properties. David Zimmerman says he could hear logs crashing about at high tide last night and worried his rented batch would be flooded.
Cindy and I were giving each other sideways glances, because we hear this big roaring and you can hear the sea. It sounds as if it's going to come in right in the front door.
East Beach resident David Zimmerman. The New Plymouth District Council says it doesn't have enough evidence a half-tide wall it built is behind the problem and wants to do more research. The Taranaki Regional Council says it's not its role to build coastal erosion protection. To sport, the All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says the chance to win an unprecedented third consecutive World Cup was an offer too good to refuse. Hansen has extended his contract with New Zealand Rugby through to the end of the 2019 World Cup in Japan. Hansen says he's keen to create history.
Real excitement about having the opportunity to go to Japan in 19 and look to try and win 3 in a row. It's never been done before, and that's a real challenge that this team, really enjoy as they get up for the big challenges.
Hansen has 52 wins, 2 draws and just 3 losses from his 57 tests as All Black coach, and helped New Zealand become its first team in rugby history to win back-to-back World Cups. Drug-Free Sport New Zealand says it's disappointed at the New Zealand Olympic Committee's endorsement of the IOC and its decision not to impose a blanket ban on Russia at the Rio Olympics. The Chief Executive of Drug-Free Sport New Zealand, Graham Steele, has called the IOC decision extremely disappointing. The NZOC had encouraged New Zealand athletes to make their feelings known about a blanket ban, and Steele says he can't understand how the organisation now believes the IOC's stand is an appropriate response to the state-sponsored Russian doping program. And a place in the finals of the Trans-Tasman Netball Finals awaits the winner of tonight's semi-final between the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic and the New South Wales Swifts in Hamilton. The winner will play the defending champions, the Queensland Firebirds, in Brisbane next weekend. That's the news.
Faster?
Basically, every Russian athlete is considered guilty until they are proved innocent of any doping offence. They have to pass a very, very high bar if they wish to go and compete in Rio.
Higher?
Can you imagine if they said no Russia and then there's a whole lot of athletes that can prove that they're clean, and what that does for the credibility of the human rights?
Stronger?
Unless they have a track record of clean international testing outside of Russia, they are out.
The road to Rio. Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espiner morning report weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, a 2-year study's found that the country's law on whether people have the mental capacity to make decisions needs an overhaul. And after 10, author Til von Randar reflects on growing up as a German boy in Shanghai during the Japanese occupation of China. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon, after morning report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Rain tomorrow morning, briefly heavy, followed by cloudy periods and isolated showers in the west. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls developing tomorrow morning, then clearing in the afternoon. Whanganui to Kapiti, also Taihape, fine spells with a few showers until tomorrow afternoon. Snow possibly affecting the desert road tomorrow morning. Wellington, Wairarapa, Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, fine with high cloud tomorrow. Buller and Westland, cloudy periods tomorrow with rain developing south of Hokitika in the evening. Southland, cloud increasing tomorrow with a few spots of rain from afternoon. Fiordland, rain tomorrow, heavy and possibly thundery from evening. And the Chatham Islands, occasional showers easing tomorrow. It's 5:09.
Thank you very much, Katrina. The Trade Minister, as you've just heard in the news, has apologised to the Prime Minister for his initial response to reports of trade retaliation by China over possible steel dumping. Todd McClay's version of events has also changed again. The Minister who first dismissed the idea of any such threats now says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has been assessing the veracity of the allegations for the past few months. Mr McClay declined our invitation to be interviewed on this tonight. Our political reporter May Heron has filed this report.
While in Indonesia last week, Todd McClay initially said there was no hard proof of any trade spat with China, and the story of Chinese officials threatening kiwi fruit, dairy and wool exporters was extremely hypothetical. A few days later, Mr McClay said he remembered he had been personally briefed on the matter by his ministry the week before when he was in China. Now, in a written statement released today, he says ministry officials have been dealing with the matter for the past few months.
I want to make it clear today that there have been discussions and limited correspondence over the past few months as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has endeavoured to assess the veracity of these reports. I've apologised to the Prime Minister for not being able to provide more details at the time.
Todd McClay says he's asked his office for a full review and has received assurances from the Chinese government that it's not taking any retaliatory action. Labour's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says the whole thing has been a mess. He says Mr McClay is out of his depth and must resign.
I don't think Todd McClay or John Key have been straight up about this issue from day one. At the start of this, we had the Prime Minister saying that there had been no indication from China that there was a problem. There clearly had been an indication. MFAT officials had been working on it for months, we now discover today from Todd McClay. This is a complete mess. It's been thoroughly mishandled, and we're talking here about exports to our biggest export market.
John Key says he isn't worried about Todd McClay's handling of the matter.
I think he took a very literal interpretation of the question that was asked of him, and while I haven't gone back to look at the footage, may have been technically correct, the point I was making to him is that's giving a very specific and I think dancing on the head of a pin type of answer to what was really a broader question is the way I'd interpret it.
Mr Key says he still has full confidence in Todd McClay.
I wouldn't expect his resignation, but I think it's a matter of good practice of the government to try and make sure that we are clear in what we're saying.
Todd McClay refused to be interviewed by Checkpoint. He says there is a limit to what he can say, as there are legal constraints around the reporting of competition complaints that are not yet under investigation. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
Yes, as May said, the Minister Todd McClay declined our invitation to be interviewed this evening. We will talk to Andrew Little about this after 6 o'clock. Does he reasonably and seriously think the Minister should resign? 12 minutes past 5. Child, Youth and Family has been forced to apologise to a Nelson landlord after it ignored her concerns for the welfare of 2 children living in her rental property. Sinead Ogilvie went to SIFS with concerns about the 2 children, aged 6 and 9, after visiting the property and seeing the conditions they were living in, but she was told they wouldn't intervene because the children's condition wasn't life-threatening. The tenants left recently owing 10 weeks in rent and with more than $25,000 worth of damage to the property. Ms Ogilvie has since written an open letter to SIFS about the state of the property, outlining her extreme concerns for the welfare and health and safety of the 2 children. This afternoon she described the conditions the children were living in.
Every room had dog feces in it. There were cigarette butts in every room. The kitchen was an absolute nightmare. There was rotten food, mouse droppings on the bench, urine stained and covered sheets and clothing just dumped next to the washing machine that stunk. It was just a real mess. But then there was little signs of a child's life in the home, and that was what was really gutting. You know, walking past a pair of mouldy pyjamas in the hallway that had, you know, obviously child's poo in them, and then right next to that, you know, there'd be a tiny little jandal or a Barbie doll. It was then that I thought, nah, I'm not going to be another, you know, one of those. They've moved out of homes like this before, right? And people simply cut their losses, fix it up and rent it out again. And I feel like there's no follow-up with the family. You know, they're obviously going to live like this with their kids at another home. And I thought, I don't want to be that person. I want to make sure that I make a difference in some way. Sorry, it's upsetting. So, yeah.
You right?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's just really awful to think that 2 young kids had to call that home.
It was that awful what you saw, that even to describe it to me now is that upsetting.
Yeah, like, I just can't comprehend, you know, two little kids coming home from school and that's their reality. Like, it's unbelievable. The damage to the property in terms of both garage doors had been driven through by the mum's partner. There were holes punched in the walls. There were doors off their hinges. And I thought, when did these violent outbursts happen? You know, were the kids there? Were they scared? Were they, you know, were they worried? How were those kids feeling when this sort of stuff happened, and how often did it happen? And like I said, I just couldn't forgive myself if we just simply, soldiered on, got it ready, rented it out again, and forgot about those kids and their life in there.
Sinead, you've obviously witnessed this, and you've approached SIFS both privately and publicly. And what you're also saying is that you're not alone in having approached SIFS. Is that right? You met a woman who was the grandmother of one of the children or children in the house, and she'd approached SIFS too? So
on the Wednesday last week, I arrived at the house. I had to take, obviously, a bit of time off work to get things sorted. And this woman was standing on the footpath, and she was really angry. And she said, is this you guys? Are you looking after this? And I said, yes, unfortunately. Who are you? And she said, look, my grandson lived in that house with this woman. And she said she's complained to SIFS numerous times over the last 2 years about the state of the homes that she lives in, this woman. Apparently she has actually done more than a few dump runs with all of this trash and everything from this woman's house. Each time she moves, the neglect follows her. And she said she's been simply fobbed off by SIFS or told, oh, there'll be family strengthening meetings and, all of this stuff. But really that just highlights, are we so afraid, or are we so PC now that we think that the best thing we can do for these kids is having a family strengthening meeting? I mean, what is that? Surely the kids' well-being is more of a priority than helping this woman sort through whatever major issues she's obviously got. So Sinead, in good faith, you believe the grandmother has contacted SIFS on a number of occasions plural, and that nothing has been done. And so she has alerted SIFS to the conditions the children have been living in, and nothing has been done to remedy that. I truly believe that, because I feel even if they had put a sort of program in place or anything like that, why would they still be living in those conditions? And she has verbatim told me, yes, she's definitely called them numerous times, and she feels fobbed off. Sinead Ogilvie, who went to SIFS herself about this, we asked the Ministry of Social Development, which oversees SIFS, of course, for an interview. It declined, but the operations manager for Upper South, Helen Aiken, sent us a statement apologising. She says Sinead's photos prove it did not adequately assess the family situation. Ms Aiken says SIFS have been to visit the children in their new house and will be monitoring them closely to ensure their safety and well-being. That statement from the operations manager for Upper South, Helen Aiken. It's 18 minutes past 5. A professional cricketer has gone on trial in the Hamilton District Court accused of raping a woman after being out with her in May last year. Scott Kugelijn, who's 24, plays for the Northern Knights based in Hamilton. The woman he's charged with raping is 21. The crux of the case comes down to consent. Our Waikato reporter Andrew McRae has been in court and joins us now. Hi Andrew, what can you tell us?
Good evening, John. The two met at a party. They then went into town to a bar and then went back to the woman's flat. Intimacy developed. He indicated he wanted intercourse with her. She declined on a number of times. Eventually, they both fell asleep. But on waking, they became pretty intimate again. And according to the Crown, it ended up with him being on top of her, holding her wrists and raping her. She told friends that night and the next day what had happened and then reported the incident to the police a couple of weeks later.
Andrew, the woman herself was the first witness, is that right? So what did she say?
She told the court that she was pretty intoxicated by the time she went into town. They'd gone to a bar with others, but ended up just the two of them. She talked about going to the toilet at one point and falling asleep in a cubicle for a few minutes. She said she felt comfortable with Scott Kugelijn and there were no problems at all. Later they both went to her flat in a taxi. It was only much later, while they were in bed, that she said she started to become feeling uncomfortable. They fell asleep at one stage, and then it's on waking, it's when the defendant, she says, raped her. She said that she was really confused afterwards, was in a daze and crying and didn't really know what to do.
The day ended with cross-examination by the defence. What happened during that?
Well, Scott Kugelijn's lawyer, Philip Morgan QC, asked the woman a number of questions about that evening. Most of those questions she couldn't give an answer to, said she couldn't recall what happened. One of them being a suggestion that she had told friends earlier that she was keen on Mr. Krugerlein and that she was intending to take him home to bed. She agreed that she was in a happy mood that night, had been friendly or very friendly with him. Mr. Morgan put it to her that on the night she was pretty intoxicated and that Mr. Krugerlein had, and she'd made it pretty obvious to everyone around her at the party and at the bar, that she was really setting her sights on him. She said no, that she described it more as flirting and not pursuing. Now, John, the defence says that Mr. Krugerlein believed that there was consent and that he did have reasonable grounds to think so. And the trial's set down for 4 days and it's before a jury of 8 men and 4 women.
Andrew McRae talking about those proceedings in the Hamilton District Court. Thank you, Andrew. Let's go to Taranaki now, where a beach settlement is in clean-up mode again today after storm surges washed up rotting animal carcasses and tossed huge logs through fences. East Beach residents in Waitara say they feel abandoned by the local authorities and fear for their properties. Our Taranaki reporter, Robin Martin, has been at East Beach.
David Zimmerman's East Beach home is one of the most exposed at the mouth of the Waitara River. He says he could hear logs crashing about at high tide last night and was worried that his rented batch was going to be flooded.
We're here very wild and woolly, and Cindy and I were giving each other sideways glances, because we hear this big roaring and the wind and the rain, and you can hear the sea. It sounds as if it's going to come in right in the front door.
At 2 o'clock this afternoon, the tide tossed a huge log through the fence Mr. Zimmerman had built since last month's flood. He's had enough and wants help urgently, or he says it will be too late.
Basically, we're going to get washed away. We need protection from the sea, and unfortunately, it looks like that is what's going to happen to us down here if we don't get some form of protection and a big rock wall out the front, right along the beach line to protect all of the whānau living down here.
Waitara Community Board member Trevor Dudunsky says the New Plymouth District Council is wiping its hands of the problem and is referring residents to the Regional Council. Mr. Dudunsky says the local authorities are losing sight of who they represent.
When it comes to walkways and stuff like that, we can fix it pretty well much straight away. And where are we going with this policy of not helping the residents out? They're the ratepayers of our communities. And if we don't get off our butts and start looking after them, we ain't going to have any left.
Mr. Dudunsky says unless a seawall is built, the homes will eventually be swept into the ocean.
They need to put a wall of boulders out at the straight line with that surf club there, right through, and then backfill it. And that way the wall, it takes the sting out of the waves. If you allow the waves to run, they will take this away in the next 10 years. The whole lot, and they'll be in those houses at the back there.
The New Plymouth District Council's policy is to only protect strategic and significant assets from erosion. The East Beach properties are on freehold private land and not considered a public asset. Group Manager Strategy Liam Hodgetts says expert advice on whether a council-built half-tide wall is contributing to the problem was inconclusive.
The findings really is indicating that we just have to do some more monitoring, and we've got to put in a monitoring regime that indicates that is able to sort of grasp all of the data at a regular basis that can be put into a monitoring program where a consultant can then give us some advice.
Mr. Hodgetts says the council built the half-tide wall and it will not walk away from its responsibilities, but he is not able to say how long any monitoring period would need to be. He says in the meantime the council is keeping in touch with the block trustees and its residents about their concerns.
Which of course is that this storm event and subsequent storm events, that in the future will continue to erode the beach or not. What we've been saying from all along is it's a highly dynamic environment and that erosion occurs up and down the Taranaki coastline, particularly in the north.
In a statement, the Taranaki Regional Council's Director of Resource Management, Fred McClay, says it's not its function in law to construct works to avoid or mitigate the effects of coastal erosion. Mr. McClay says its role is to issue consents for erosion protection works, but no application has been made for the land in question. For Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin tēnei.
25 minutes past 5 exactly now. Coming up on Checkpoint, the chair of the Democrats' National Committee resigns over leaked emails on the eve of the party's national convention. A disaster, really, for the Democrats. We're going to talk to some Bernie Sanders supporters too and ask them what they think of this. And the IOC rejects calls for Russia to be banned from next month's Rio Olympics. Instead, it offers athletes something of a lifeline by ruling that decisions on individual competitors will be left to international sports federations, the relevant sport. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. Please feel free to text 2101 if you're a texter. Email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz if you like emails, and we're on Twitter and Facebook if you are a social media fan. Thank you for being with us. 6 countdown supermarkets are set to close as the chain's Australian parent company shuts stores and slashes hundreds of jobs. Its Australian parent, Woolworths, has revealed 500 jobs will go there and back office and supply roles as part of an overhaul of its business amid pretty tough competition in the retail industry. That's what Woolworths is saying. As Marnie Dunlop reports, the future of the company's Easy Buy fashion chain is also uncertain.
Woolworths is closing 30 stores in Australasia that it says are underperforming, including 6 supermarkets in New Zealand. Closure of one of the New Zealand countdown stores has already been announced. The supermarket in Rangiora is closing in October, and a nearby store is expected to employ those staff. Another store will be closing temporarily while a replacement is built. Countdown spokesperson James Walker can't say where the 4 stores are or how many jobs will be affected, as commercial discussions are continuing.
We will work through this after commercial discussions have taken place. But these stores will happen, the closures will most likely happen from the middle of next year onwards.
So as it stands, the stores that are marked to be closed, the staff in those don't know that yet?
That's correct.
Mr Walker says he's unsure exactly when staff at those stores will be told, but they are likely to be redeployed.
Our priority is to offer redeployment, and we're confident that there will be opportunities nearby for those teams.
Woolworths also owns the women's fashion chain Easy Buy, which has 5 stores and an online retail business in New Zealand. Its chief executive, Brad Baduki, told a press conference today that it intends to sell Easy Buy.
Easy Buy has had a very challenging performance trajectory, in particular over the last year, but over the last few years in general. This is at least partly driven by changes in exchange rate between Australia and New Zealand, recognising that close to 70% of Easy Buy sales are into New Zealand, and that exchange rate has moved materially, but also between the US dollar and the Kiwi dollar, and at least part of it has been driven by exchange rates.
Etu Union and First Union say they have not been told of the closures. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Marnie Dunlop tēnei.
Kia ora, Marnie. Major anti-doping agencies around the world are lining up to rubbish the decision by the International Olympic Committee to not ban the entire Russian team from next month's Rio Games over revelations of state-run doping. The IOC has instead set out strict conditions for individual Russian athletes to compete and has handed the responsibility to determine eligibility to the respective sports federations. But with just 2 weeks to go before the Games, critics say there's simply not enough time for that to happen, effectively rendering it meaningless. Graham Steele from Drug Free Sport New Zealand says the IOC has dropped the ball.
We would have wanted a ban on the Russian team. It would be the starting point, with an opportunity for those who could provide a compelling case that they could demonstrate that they were clean, but that would need to go to an independent panel that could look at it objectively and consistently. And we don't think that this regime in any way meets that requirement.
That's Graham Steele from Drug Free Sport New Zealand. This report on the issue from the ABC's Barney Porter.
The World Anti-Doping Agency, along with 14 national anti-doping organisations, had urged the IOC to impose a blanket ban on Russia in response to the recent McLaren report, which had found evidence of state-sponsored doping by Russian athletes at the 2014 Winter Olympics. But the IOC president, Thomas Bach, says the body wanted to protect the rights of clean Russian competitors hoping to take part at Rio.
Every human being is entitled to individual justice. There we have set the bar to the absolute limit for how Russian athletes can achieve to compete in Rio. All of them have to meet individually these number of very strict criteria we have established today.
Russia has hailed the decision as objective. Kevin Gosper is a former vice president of the IOC. He backs the organisation's call.
The natural and emotional response to what's been happening in Russia is to take the Russians away from the Games. But it's not a simple issue. It's a very complicated issue. But in a fine balance, it's very important to keep the Olympic movement together.
But others are less supportive. In a statement, the 59-member Global Institute of National Anti-Doping Organisations has said the IOC has failed to demonstrate strong leadership on what it's described as a sad day for clean sport. Travis T. Tygart is the head of the US anti-doping agency.
I think it's a significant blow to the rights of clean athletes in the integrity of competition for there not to be a suspension of the Russian Olympic Committee and then a clear, uniform standard by which any truly clean Russian athlete that might be there can apply to compete in this year's Olympic Games.
Thomas Bach has also announced the individual sports federations will now have primary responsibility for determining every single Russian athlete's eligibility for Rio in a series of strict checks. But even that's drawn criticism. Dick Pound is a former president of WADA.
Passing the buck down to international federations, especially this close to the Olympic Games, when they probably don't have rules that would allow them to act quickly, is simply it's a huge mistake.
Catherine Ordway is an anti-doping consultant and sports lawyer who helped set up Australia's anti-doping regime.
I think the international federations should have been given a heads up in a sense and be ready for this type of decision, because the IAAF has essentially gone through this path already. Tennis has come out, the International Tennis Federation, and said, well, our athletes are out in the world competing all the time and they're constantly being tested outside of Russia, so I think that those athletes will be fine. Some of the other sports are not so clear-cut and it will be really difficult for them to make that call. They're a big player on the world scene. A country like Russia maybe is just too big and too powerful for them to take on head-on.
Meanwhile, Rio organisers are dealing with more immediate problems in the 2-week lead up to the opening ceremony. The Olympic Village has officially opened its doors, but Australia, Britain and Brazil have spurned the facility. Kitty Chiller is the chef de mission of the Australian Olympic team.
We felt that our building was not safe because of the combination of plumbing and electrical issues. When we did our stress test yesterday afternoon, there were significant leakages from plumbing pipes. I have never experienced, this is my 5th Olympic Games, a village in this state or lack of state of readiness at this point in time.
Kevin Gosper remains confident the problems will be rectified.
They know their reputation is at stake. They've been under a lot of pressure. I've been around since 1956 and I've seen these sort of things even with the Heidelberg village when we were in it in 1956. And you get these last-minute hiccups. Even with Sochi, there were some very serious difficulties with the village and with the media village as well. But I'm sure the Rio people will step up and fix it.
The former IOC chairman, Kevin Gosper, ending that report from the ABC's Barney Porter. It's coming up to 26 minutes to 6. In the next 26 minutes, the chair of the Democratic National Committee has resigned over those emails. We talked to a party strategist. Is this a disaster going into the convention? She says no, perhaps inevitably. Steve Hansen is staying on as the All Blacks coach until the end of 2019. He has a win record of over 90%, but he wants to get better, although not all of that is about on-the-field stuff. It's a fascinating interview coming up before 6, but Katrina Batten, who really does need a woolen coat, it's so cold, and he has the RNZ headlines.
The Prime Minister says he still has confidence in his Trade Minister over his handling of reports of trade retaliation by China over possible steel dumping. Todd McClay has apologised to John Key for his initial response to the reports. Mr McClay's version of events has also changed again. He now says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has been assessing the veracity of the allegations for the past few months. The government has adopted the goal of New Zealand becoming predator-free by 2050. Rats, possums, stoats and feral cats will be targeted. The government will invest $28 million in a new joint venture company called Predator Free New Zealand Limited, which will be set up by the beginning of next year. Countdown isn't naming most of the supermarkets it will be closing and says even the staff and stores affected aren't aware yet. Its parent company Woolworths is closing 30 stores in Australasia, including 6 in New Zealand, but some will be replaced. Child, Youth and Family has been forced to apologise to a Nelson landlord after it ignored her concerns for the welfare of 2 children living in her rental property. Sinead Ogilvie told Checkpoint the 6-year-old and 9-year-old were living among dog and human faeces, urine-soaked clothes and sheets, mouse droppings and rotten food. The agency says it has visited children in their new house and is now monitoring them closely. A professional cricketer is on trial in the Hamilton District Court on a charge of rape. Scott Kugelheim pleaded not guilty to sexual violation by rape in May last year. The High Court in Auckland has heard evidence that the Ministry for Primary Industries was itself thinking of going to court to clarify the legality of swamp kauri exports. A beach settlement at Waitara in Taranaki is in clean-up mode again after storm surges washed up rotting animal carcasses and tossed huge logs through fences. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Thanks, Katrina. Predator-free New Zealand by 2050. The Minister, Maggie Barry, is joining us after 6 o'clock. Let's turn to business news now with our business editor, Giles Beckford, joining us from Wellington. Giles, Infometrics is predicting house prices will rise by another 17%, a very exact kind of figure, before falling. And a big Chinese bank is looking at spreading its wings in New Zealand.
Indeed. Infometrics is an economic consultancy. They're not a bank, so they're not trying to sell you a mortgage, just their expertise. They've been looking at the demand and the expected demand for housing and housing consents, building consents over the next year or so. They're suggesting that it will peak at around 40,000 nationally next year. A good deal of that, of course, will be in Auckland, and that will come down to the start of that closing of the gap between the supply and the demand. But in the meantime, it suggests that house prices will go up as much as 17%. And then once that imbalance has been readied and it has been eliminated, or at least been narrowed quite markedly, we can expect to see a fall in house prices. Now, we're not talking about a stumble, we're not talking about a plunge, we're talking about perhaps 11% over a couple of years. It suggests it could be 14% by the early 2020s. But it suggests in the end, we'll start to see some sanity about the Auckland housing market in particular, but nationwide, we'll see some sense come back into it, and certainly the rate of price growth will start to slow. Now, you mentioned they're a Chinese bank that's also flexing its wings. It's the second biggest bank in the world, so it tells you it's got a bit of muscle behind it. It's the China Construction Bank. Its parent in China has given the local branch another $140 million to help expand business. Now, they've only been going a couple of years, but they've already got around $400 million in assets. They're reasonably well connected when you've got John Shewan and Jenny Shipley on your board of directors. So from that point of view, we can expect them, I would think, to pop up in a variety of deals. But they won't be too flashy about it. They'll be reasonably discreet, but they'll be financing trade deals, infrastructure projects, which is one of the things they specialise in China. And they've also got some ambitions in the retail banking sector. Now, they're not going to go for bricks and mortar. They'll be looking in due course at some form of digital or electronic platform. And once again, we'll start to see them to become a favourite, I suspect, with the Chinese or the Chinese expatriate population in New Zealand.
Yeah. So, Giles, just very quickly before we move on to the markets, the $140 million cash injection, obviously that's for spending on literal physical expansion of the premises and all that kind of stuff. But is this money for lending? Is this money
This is boosting their capital so that they can go out, and if you come to them with a proposal saying, I have a supplier in China who needs some financing and we've come to an agreement, can you give us the bridging finance? Can you give us the loan for it? We want to build water pipes in Auckland, and I've got this Chinese supplier, or actually company's going to come in and do it for us from China. Can you finance them? This is precisely the sort of thing that they'll be involved in.
Okay. Quick run on the markets. Thanks, Giles.
Well, it goes without saying our share market is looking just, I don't know what it's got. It's on steroids at the moment, up 91 points, 1.3%, 7,317. The big stocks, Spark, Sky TV, Sky City Entertainment, all in demand. Yield is the name of the day. The New Zealand dollar, 69.8 US cents, 93.4 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor. Thanks so much, Giles. Appreciate it. The chair of the Democratic National Committee has resigned on the eve of the party's national convention after leaked emails reveal party officials were actively favouring Hillary Clinton during the presidential primary and working to undermine Bernie Sanders. In a moment, we talk to a party strategist, but first a quick background from Diane Hodges of Reuters.
The announcement came just one day before the opening of the Democratic National Convention, throwing the party into disarray as it prepares to nominate Hillary Clinton in the race for the White House. Officials were hoping to bring party members together, but those hopes are now being tested after more than 19,000 emails from Debbie Wasserman Schultz and other top party officials were leaked. The emails appeared to buttress charges from rival Democrat Bernie Sanders that party officials favored Clinton during the primaries. Sanders demanded Wasserman Schultz step down. Following news of the resignation, Clinton released a statement thanking the DNC head for her leadership over the past 5 years. President Barack Obama also paid tribute to Wasserman Schultz, saying she played a critical role in passing legislation on the economy and health care.
The report from Reuters, some Sanders supporters are going to join us in a few minutes, but Marianne Marsh is a Democratic strategist. She's just arrived in Philadelphia for the party's convention, and I asked her how the party can possibly claim unity and cohesion and solidarity off the back of this email leak.
Remember, it was only yesterday, that Hillary Clinton unveiled Tim Kaine, who's going to be her vice presidential candidate, and by all accounts hit it out of the park in Miami. A great partnership, a wonderful speech, off to a terrific start, and yet that no one's talking about it today because of these emails. So I think Debbie Wasserman Schultz had to leave. She had to go, rip the Band-Aid off, and she's been replaced by Donna Brazile, who I'm a huge fan of, will do a tremendous job, has worked a number of presidential campaigns over the years, a longtime Democratic National Committee member, well known to many audiences here nationally and around the world for her analysis with CNN, and I think she's going to do a great job, so it was a good pick.
Okay, doesn't this, though, get to the heart of the criticism of Hillary Clinton and her campaign, and that is that there is a debased kind of pragmatism, cynicism about the way she works, about the concessions she's prepared to make, about the compromises she's prepared to make. Isn't this her Achilles heel being spotlit?
I think there are 2 points here. First of all, everyone should remember that when the DNC was hacked back in April, the independent analysis that was done identified that the hackers were from Russia. And that's something that everyone should remember. There were Russian hackers. That was identified in April. It's not a coincidence that they're being leaked now on the eve of the Democratic Convention, and there's a lot of relationships there between Donald Trump, his campaign manager, Paul Manafort, the Russians, and WikiLeaks. So that's something to keep in mind. Number two, I also think you're going to see Hillary Clinton put on a very positive convention. It's going to be a stark contrast from much of what you heard at the Republican Party, and especially Donald Trump's speech, which was midnight in America, that sounded more like the bonfire of the vanities, very negative, very dark, very dystopian. And instead, I think you're going to see the Democrats and Hillary Clinton be very positive about their agenda and all the things they're going to do. And I think by picking Tim Kaine, she's sending a message that says, look, it's great to be a progressive, but you have to know how to get things done. Being a progressive and not getting anything done doesn't matter. And that's why she picked Tim Kaine, because they want to get things done. And sometimes that means compromising.
But if you're out there and you're alienated from politics, if you're disconnected, if you're living your life on the minimum wage or a little bit above it, if you're struggling to get by, if you're really making no progress at all, and Trump speaks to your sense of alienation, if he is the anti-establishment candidate, don't these emails just remind us how much establishment Hillary Clinton is?
I think it will with some of the Bernie Sanders supporters who were leaning towards Trump anyways. And I think what you will see between now and November, and that in many respects you've outlined the challenge for both of them. This is a campaign, an election that's going to be waged on getting people to vote. And I think Trump has really tapped into a lot of the anger and anxiety and fear out there, and that's what he's really pushing. And in many respects, sort of putting a match to gasoline on it. Hillary Clinton's trying to take a different approach and a more positive approach. These emails certainly don't help her. And that's why I think Debbie Wasserman Schultz had to go today. But I think what's being lost here is that it was Russian hackers who got into the Democratic National Convention seem to be working with the Trump campaign and trying to influence a U.S. election, and that is unheard of.
Marianne, you give a damn passionately about this, don't you? Why do you care so much? In other words, what does Hillary Clinton say to you? What does she offer you? Why are you such a supporter of hers?
I'm a Democrat, and she's a Democratic nominee, and there was a really hard-fought primary, and she came out the winner head and shoulders above Bernie Sanders. Remember, when Hillary Clinton ran against Barack Obama, she came much closer to beating Obama than Sanders did, yet she, got out of the race, endorsed him, worked very hard, and then went to work for him in the administration. And I think what you will see about Hillary Clinton is when she's been in the jobs on her own, when she was a United States Senator and Secretary of State, when she makes a promise and she says she's going to do something, she gets the job done. And I think that's the big difference here. And I think that's the contrast she's going to draw with Donald Trump, who doesn't have a record of keeping his word, especially on many of his business deals. Make no mistake about it. This is going to be a very close, hard-fought, ugly race.
Ugly race. Marianne Marsh, who was a party strategist just going into that convention in Philadelphia, obviously will be there all week. But we wanted to meet Bernie Sanders supporters, so we went to a pro-Bernie rally in Philadelphia, and we met two women whose admiration for Sanders is so great that they actually travelled to support him from Canada. Kim Crozier and Karen Sukin say the Sanders supporters and American voters they know don't want Hillary Clinton as president, even if that means they run the risk of President Trump. Wearing homemade T-shirts and carrying placards, they told me why it was Bernie or bust.
I think that Bernie Sanders has actually given a breath of hope to people all across North America and the world. His message is far-reaching, and we can't give up this chance. This is an opportunity
of a lifetime.
He's a once-in-a-lifetime guy.
And yet, Clinton is going to be the nominee, right? And so what's more important, championing Bernie or beating Trump?
Champion Bernie, for sure.
You're talking about a lesser of two evils mantra that's worked historically in U.S. politics and Canadian politics, and probably most places and countries across the world. It doesn't work anymore now with social media because we've seen Hillary's voting record. We've seen the mistakes that she's made. I'm sure that Donald Trump could create a loop that's minutes or of her saying, I misspoke, I made a mistake, and it's over and over and over. Bernie Sanders has 30 years of not making mistakes, of predicting the future, of making the right decision against popular opinion in the day. Championing Bernie is, the superdelegates haven't voted. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that's the Democratic National Convention. That's why we're here.
It's contested.
So Kim, that lesser of two evils mantra, is that, so people are going out and saying to Democratic supporters, vote Clinton because she's the lesser of two evils. In other words, she's better than Trump. She's not what you might hope for, but she's better than Trump. But that's not enough for you. You want
it's
Bernie.
Her platform, John. It's her platform. Is that a platform that you want to be elected to the highest office in the land in the United States of America? I might not be that bad, but I'm better than Trump. It's on her website. People dedicated to getting Hillary Clinton elected, and in parentheses, and keeping Trump out of the White House. That's not a platform. That's fear-mongering.
So, Karen, Kim says Clinton is a compromise candidate. I guess the lesser of two evils, and you want to aim higher than that. So what is it about Bernie Sanders that makes you prepared to risk a Trump presidency to support him?
Bernie is a humanist. Bernie always puts the people first. I watched hundreds of hours of Senate video. He's unwavering. He's been fighting for the same thing for decades. He's true. He's been in there for 30 years. He's not a rich man. That tells us he's a good man. We were talking on the way up, pardon me, that, probably after 30 years, if we were in his shoes, we would have given up, taken the money, and looked after our families.
We might have.
Kim and Karen, Bernie Sanders supporters, members of Afghanistan's Hazara minority, have been burying more than 80 people killed in a suicide attack in Kabul at the weekend. Many are blaming political leaders for security failures that led to the massacre, which has been claimed by Islamic State. The attack against a demonstration by the mainly Shiite Hazara was among the worst in Afghanistan since the fall of the former Taliban regime. And it's raising fears of a new escalation in violence. The ABC South Asia correspondent James Bennett reports.
On Saturday, Merullah, a 27-year-old Afghan librarian, joined a Kabul demonstration by the ethnic and religious minority group the Hazaras, upset by the government's decision to route major new power lines away from their provinces. The peaceful demonstration and Merullah's life was ended by two suicide bombers whose explosives killed at least 80 and left hospitals overflowing with hundreds of wounded. Jawad Saidi Laku is Merullah's cousin and a Hazara activist.
We lost him, unfortunately.
The so-called Islamic State quickly claimed responsibility, stating its targets were Shia Muslims.
It's IS handwriting. The Taliban, usually they attack targets which have a military relevance or are linked with the government, while IS, as we also know from Syria and Iraq, has no qualms about attacking purely civilian targets.
Thomas Rutik from the Afghan Analyst Network says while Taliban attacks do kill civilians, it doesn't usually target them. That's because, he says, the Taliban's ultimate aim is to govern Afghanistan, whereas IS wants to ferment the same unrest it has elsewhere in the Middle East.
And I think they just want to create what's already happened in Syria and Iraq, an armed conflict between Sunni and Shia parts of the population in Afghanistan.
While some see the bombing as a show of strength for IS, Thomas Rutig says it parallels the organisation's fortunes on other battlefields, first conceding territory, then lashing out. And he says the group remains far less significant a threat than the Taliban.
You can, of course, not exclude that the local IS group will try to pull off other attacks like these, but still in comparison with the Taliban, IS is the lesser problem in Afghanistan.
Sectarian division may be IS's goal, but most of the victims' anger is directed at the government. The Shia Hazaras make up 9% of Afghanistan's predominantly Sunni population, but activist Jawad Saidi Laku says they're fighting ethnic, not religious discrimination.
We will show the world that still the Hazara people are facing systematic target killing and the systematic discrimination against them.
He vows their battle will continue peacefully.
Steve Hansen is to stay on as All Black coach until the end of 2019, giving him, of course, another shot at a Rugby World Cup. Since Hansen became head coach in 2012, the All Blacks have played 57 tests and won 52. In the history of international team sport, there are a few coaches with records like it. Having said that, most of those tests were played with a roll call that includes McCaw, Carter, Nonu, Smith, Woodcock, Mialamu, some of the greatest players ever to pull on a black jersey. And he wasn't sure about life after those players until he coached the 2016 All Blacks against Wales. Yes, he thought, I still want to do this.
Yeah, well, after winning the World Cup and questioning myself whether it was right for the team, if I continued, and as we got closer and closer to the Welsh series, I got more and more excited and hungry for more. And in the series itself, really understood that I wanted still to be part of it, and really grateful for the opportunity to be there, and didn't really want to let it go from my point of view. So once I established that my family were happy and the team itself were happy, and the union wanted me, it was really a no-brainer.
Because in a way the job changed, didn't it? Because up to the World Cup, you were, and forgive me, I'm being very one-dimensional here, but you were managing brilliance. You were managing McCaw, Carter, Nonu, Smith, Woodcock, and then suddenly they're all gone. And so you're starting again, and you're starting again with guys who are raw talent, who have enormous potential, Adi Savia, for example, but who are young and unproven. So it becomes a different kind of job, does it?
Yeah, it does, and that's why we've said we're re-establishing ourselves. We're not starting afresh though, and the whole management group can take a bow in the way we've gone about the planning and the readiness for when that group of people you've just mentioned, 818 test caps, I think it was, have moved on. And, Rito is now our most capped player at about, I think he's in the 80s. But he wasn't coming in fresh as captain. He had already had 9 test matches. So the young raw talent had something to wrap itself around when it came in. And it's going to be, a really interesting year and a challenge for us to continue to strive for greatness. And what we get out of it will be what we put into it for the year.
And greatness matters every game, doesn't it? I mean, if you, for example, you're playing a dead rubber against Australia, that odd Bledisloe Cup fixture that kind of stands out on its own, how do you tell your players, this matters, we have to be great in this game too? How do you constantly reinforce that?
Well, I think it's understanding our identity, which, therefore moulds into our legacy. And our legacy is about honouring the jersey every time we play it and pull it on, and every time we train to put it on. So there's no such thing as a dead rubber. It's an important occasion to play a test match for the All Blacks, and therefore you've got to honour it and do it right, and therefore you've got to try and be better than you were the last time you did it.
You also have worked on the whole notion that better people make better players, and I having observed you, because obviously I love rugby and I watch it very closely, I think you've worked hard on yourself, haven't you? Because you could be quite a prickly bugger at first when you first took over. You could be a little bit annoyed by the media and slightly short-fused. Have you worked on that? I mean, forgive me for putting that bluntly, but have you worked really hard on being better yourself?
Well, I think you're right. I can be a little prickly and still can be, but given the right circumstances. But Brian Lahore was the first person to talk about better people making better rugby players, and we as a group understood what he meant and have strived to do that. And if you want other people to do it and you're the leader, then you've got to do it yourself. So every day I'm trying to be better than I was the day before, and I don't think I've stopped learning as a coach, and that's a good thing, because I must improve if I want others to improve, and I'm looking forward to doing that.
Yeah, how do you do that? What is it you do? What are the things you're working on to become a better coach? I mean, when you've coached 57 games and you've won 52 of them, and of the 5 games you didn't win, 2 were draws. I mean, that's an unprecedented record. So how do you improve on that?
Well, the first thing is you acknowledge to yourself that you need to, and then the second thing is it's a choice. If you want to be better, you can be, because you can go out and continue to learn and strive to be better, and learning something that comes firstly within yourself, and then being open and flexible enough in your thinking to hear other people and hear their views, and no one is the finished article, and that's what stops you. If you think you've arrived, then all of a sudden you're going to run into the back of the bus and go no further. But this group of people, myself included, we don't believe we've arrived where we want to get to. We've still got things we want to do, and to do that we have to be better.
Obviously, the 2019 World Cup is because no team has ever won 2 in a row. So obviously, it goes without saying that 3 in a row would be quite extraordinary. Can I, just before we go, and it's been lovely talking to you, can I just ask you about what must be one of the most wonderful moments in your job, and that is telling a youngster that he's in? Is that magic every single time?
Well, the ironic thing is, yes, it is, but the ironic thing is I don't do that. Either Darren Shand or Gilbert Anoka, our 2 managers, they get to make that phone call. My phone call is to tell somebody who's missed out. But it is a special moment when you see all the players arrive at the hotel for the first time, and even the older guys coming back in and seeing the look on their face when they're getting their gear, and at the first team meeting when we're talking about what our expectations are, and it is special. It's a special environment to be in, and it's a real privilege to be given another opportunity to continue to do that. So looking forward to it.
Steve Hansen, who's staying on as the All Blacks coach. Obviously, the 2019 Rugby World Cup is in Japan. The rugby world are working very, very hard to develop rugby in Japan. That will be a fantastic occasion. It's 6 o'clock. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Whether you're listening on the radio or watching us screening live on Freeview Channel 50 or streaming live on the RNZ website, thank you for being with us. In the next 30 minutes, the government announces plans to make New Zealand predator-free by 2050. The Conservation Minister Maggie Barry joins us live. Trade Minister Todd McClay reveals officials have for months been examining reports that China could retaliate against an investigation into steel dumping. He's apologised to the Prime Minister. We talked to Andrew Little about this because the Minister wouldn't join us. And children stripped naked, tear-gassed and strapped into mechanical devices. It sounds like a horror movie, but it's the reality of Australia's Northern Territory youth justice system. And it happened as recently as 2014. But first, here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The Prime Minister says he still has confidence in his Trade Minister over his handling of reports of trade retaliation by China over possible steel dumping. The Minister has apologised to John Key for his initial response to reports of trade retaliation by China over possible steel dumping. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
Todd McClay's version of events has also changed again. He now says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has been assessing the veracity of the allegations for the past few months. John Key says Todd McClay did give the wrong impression about whether government officials were aware of the reports. He says while it's good practice for the government to be clear in what it is saying, he did not expect Mr McClay's resignation over the matter. From Parliament, Demelza Leslie.
Countdown isn't naming most of the supermarkets it will be closing and says even the staff and stores affected aren't aware yet. Its Australian parent company Woolworths has revealed that 500 jobs will go in back office and supply roles in Australia as part of an overhaul of its business and amid tough competition in the retail industry. It's closing 30 stores in Australasia, including 6 in New Zealand, but some of those will be replaced. One is in Rangiora, but Countdown says it's not able to disclose the other stores as commercial discussions are ongoing. A spokesperson, James Walker, says the company is sure it will be able to redeploy staff when the closures do happen.
It's very unlikely that they will happen this financial year, i.e. before 30 June 2017. So we're looking at over a year away. As we always do, which is our priority, we'll work with any team affected by those closures to transfer to nearby stores.
Countdown spokesperson James Walker. Senator Bernie Sanders says the Democratic Party chairwoman had little choice but to resign following the release of thousands of emails revealing the party's attempts to undermine him. The more than 20,000 Democratic National Committee emails released by WikiLeaks shows a plan by officials to try to smear Mr Sanders as an atheist. He says the party's chair, Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, has done the party a favour by resigning.
I don't think she is qualified to be the chair of the DNC, not only for these awful emails which revealed the prejudice of the DNC, but also because we need a party that reaches out to working people and young people, and I don't think her leadership style is doing that.
Bernie Sanders' campaign endorsed Hillary Clinton's nomination for Democratic presidential nominee last month. However, tensions remain with the party as its convention gets underway in Philadelphia. Lawyers for a Northland conservation group have told the High Court that the export trade in Swamp Cody has deprived Northland of a potential processing industry it badly needs. The Far North Environmental Society has asked the court to rule on whether the Ministry for Primary Industries has been allowing the valuable timber to be sent overseas unlawfully. The 1949 Forests Act says Cody can be exported only as stumps or finished products. But the lawyer Davy Salmon says the ministry has allowed exporters to send out big logs, lightly chiselled to qualify as Māori carvings, and container loads of slabs described as rustic tabletops. Mr. Salmon says one slab was priced at $100,000 US. Northland timber workers could never afford to buy it at that price. A woman who police thought may have been trapped in a house destroyed by fire in Whanganui has been found safe at a different address. The police say the suspicious fire destroyed one house on Seafront Road in Castlecliff last night and severely damaged the house next door. The building was too badly damaged to enter and the police could not account for someone who belonged there, but they have since turned up. And a man died in a separate house fire early this morning in Ashurst near Palmerston North. The fire service says there were smoke alarms in the house. A Taranaki beach settlement is in clean-up mode again after storm surges washed up rotting animal carcasses and tossed huge logs through fences. East Beach residents in Waitara say they feel abandoned by the local authorities and fear for their properties. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin has more.
David Zimmerman's East Beach home is one of those most exposed at the mouth of the Waitara River. He says this afternoon logs came crashing through his fence for the second time in just over a month, and he was worried his rented batch would be flooded. The New Plymouth District Council says it doesn't have enough evidence a half-tide wall it built in 2014 is making storm surges worse, and it wants to do more research. The Taranaki Regional Council, meanwhile, says it is not its role to build coastal erosion protection. Ko Robin Martin Tēnei.
In sport, Drug-Free Sport New Zealand is calling the New Zealand Olympic Committee to account after it endorsed the IOC's refusal to issue a blanket ban on Russian athletes at the Rio Games. The International Olympic Committee has made it the responsibility of individual sports world governing bodies to decide if Russian athletes are clean and can compete, despite revelations of a state-sponsored doping program. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
The New Zealand Olympic Committee has come out in support of its parent body, the IOC, which has disappointed the Chief Executive of Drug-Free Sport New Zealand, Graham Steele. Steele says the decision is a black day for clean athletes and undermines the work which anti-doping agencies are doing.
This is something that we think is pretty important, and certainly we'll be having discussions with them about how it is that they've come to a view that this is an appropriate decision.
The president of the NZOC, Mike Stanley, concedes a blanket ban would have been easier to implement, but says the IOC's had to weigh up legal ramifications and the calls by some international sporting bodies for Russian athletes to be allowed to compete. This is Stephen Hewson.
Assistant coach Craig McMillan says the Black Caps' comfortable 259-run win over Zimbabwe A was the ideal build-up for the first test. The New Zealand cricketers begin the first of two tests against Zimbabwe in Bulawayo on Thursday night. The top and middle order batsmen all got time at the crease, while the bowlers had a good workout too, says McMillan.
Yeah, everyone's happy. It's been 3 days hard work. But that's what we've talked about, the conditions over here. You need a lot of patience and you need to be in the game for a long time.
Craig McMillan, that's the news.
Every weekday lunchtime, RNZ National presents in-depth coverage of international news and issues.
I will always do what is correct, whether the individual concerned is an ordinary citizen or a sitting president.
Not just the headlines, but full reporting of the most important overseas stories of the day from correspondents on the ground as world news breaks.
Prime Minister Hyder Abadi promised victory.
We will tear down the black flags of Daesh.
That's World Watch, each weekday lunchtime 20 to 1, part of Midday Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Rain tomorrow morning, briefly heavy, followed by cloudy periods and isolated showers in the west. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls, developing tomorrow morning, then clearing in the afternoon. Whanganui to Kapiti, also Taihape, fine spells with a few showers until tomorrow afternoon. Snow possibly affecting the desert road tomorrow morning. Wellington, Wairarapa, Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, fine with high cloud tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods tomorrow with rain developing south of Hokitika in the evening. Southland, cloud increasing tomorrow with a few spots of rain from afternoon. Fiordland, rain tomorrow, heavy and possibly thundery from evening. And the Chatham Islands, occasional showers easing tomorrow. It's just gone 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Lots coming up in the next 20 minutes. Let's begin with the government's announcement that it wants to make New Zealand full stop, predator-free by 2050. Under the plan, it will invest $28 million in a new joint venture company called Predator Free New Zealand Limited, which will be charged with identifying large, high-value pest control projects. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says introduced pests cost the country's economy about $3.3 billion a year. The Conservation Minister, Maggie Barry, joins us on the phone now. Welcome to Checkpoint, Minister. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you, John. Great to be here.
Predator-free, all of New Zealand in 34 years. Is that achievable?
I believe it is. I think with a combined will and a collaboration with business, philanthropy, communities around New Zealand, this is a big, hairy, stretch goal, but we can achieve it because there is a willingness to do it now. It's a vision that the Crown has outlined today when we announced it. The NGOs, all of the different organisations that were present were universally in approval of the vision and the notion of it, and also by the Crown's commitment to a very long-term goal. Not something a government normally does, but we feel that this is such an important issue led by the Prime Minister today, and we will work across Crown to make it happen.
Can we talk about funding? If we go back to the budget, if we go back to some discussions that were taking place with you in May, so a couple of months ago now, in fact almost exactly 2 months ago, there was a suggestion that DOC is underfunded. And I wonder if this is sneaking in some of the funding that DOC might have liked through the back door. You talk about philanthropy and business being involved in it too. In other words, is there still insufficient money going in to the total conservation sector in New Zealand?
I don't believe there's insufficient money going in, and we had the discussion with opposition parties who felt that the funding had been manipulated or taken away, and we've argued that one very strongly. DOC is a great organisation. It's well funded. We have nothing to apologise for, I believe, in getting business partners and philanthropists and others engaged in the process. No one government department, no one government can provide all of the money that's required to do all of the work that we want to do. For Battle for Our Birds, which I announced last Thursday in Queenstown, we have $20.7 million of new money. It's not being done from within baseline, but it was done as a response to a beach seeding event. And the amount of money the Crown is going to spend across MB, MPI is going to stay the same. So the $28 million that we announced today over 4 years is the initial start. It is, I guess, the honeypot around which others will contribute funding. And I think it is important that the Crown, for example, if we contribute $1, that $2 come from other entities, whether it's business, philanthropy, local government, communities. And that way we can all work together to achieve the vision. And I believe it is possible.
Okay, how is it possible? You talk in the media release, not all the technology to make New Zealand predator-free yet exists. So I guess that's a work in progress. What are you hoping for, and will this mean the more extensive use of 1080?
We will use 1080 as we continue to need to do in hard-to-access areas where, traditional trapping methods just don't work. 1080, I think, I've been surprised at how mild the response has been to the announcement of Battle for Our Birds this year compared to 2014. I really do think that there's a greater level of understanding about the use of this plant-based toxin than there was. There will always be people who don't agree with it and detractors, but a lot more have now come on board and realised it's essential. But I would hope that we are looking down the barrel of a predator-free New Zealand, which is also where 1080 doesn't need to be used. We spend a lot of time and money, around $100 million per year from the Crown, in actually funding pest control. 1080 is an important part of it now, but the science and technology that you referred to is growing apace. And we now can see, with great excitement, the potential for some of the things that are happening via mobile phone devices. I opened a facility at Lincoln University about a month ago where they are working to get inside the head of the predators. They are making high-pitched noises that only the rats and the stoats can hear, which is affecting their behaviour. Lights and those kinds of things lead us to know that we will soon, we hope, at least within 10 years, be able to have at least 20,000 hectares of New Zealand predator-proofed, but without using predator-proof fencing. So we think that the technology is growing at a great pace, and we have great confidence now, whereas we probably couldn't have 5 years ago or even...
Minister, if we come in, sorry, can I come in there? Because that 20,000 hectares predator-free without the use of fences is a pretty bold ambition, and obviously an admirable one. Have you an area in mind? Where do you think you might first be able to achieve that?
There are a couple of places they're working on it at the moment around New Zealand. Project Zhanzun, the Next Foundation behind that, are working very hard in the Abel Tasman National Park, and I've been down there and have looked at what they call their Ring of Steel, which is where they have the new self-resetting traps. Some of them reset up to 24 times. The Holy Grail, I guess, is 28, and people are working on 48, and people are working on that. But it's happening already in parts of New Zealand. You can fence off either with physical fences, predator-proof ones, which are really expensive, or with traps. Once you've got rid of the pests, you can keep them at bay by using the traps, and that's what I'm doing this year for Battle for Our Birds. And we are working in collaboration with Cape Sanctuary as well. They are doing great work by keeping predators out once the initial rodent population and feral cats have been knocked back.
Minister, we've just received a bit of feedback from a guy called Richard Croy, a listener called Richard Croy, and he said, John, please ask the Minister about an 11% cut in DOC funding since 2008. That's inflation adjusted. There is a sense that you've squeezed, well, not just you haven't been the Minister the entire time, but that the government has squeezed DOC tight. And is this a response, an implicit kind of shy response, an acknowledgement of that?
Not at all. I do resist entirely the idea that DOC is underfunded. Crown funding for DOC has increased by 13% since we came into office. The amount of the DOC operating budget that's funded by the Crown, and that includes successful budget bids, Kiwis for Kiwis last year, Battle for Our Birds this year, increases. So the Crown funding's increased from 281 million when we came to power in 2008-9 to 318 million. And that is not a reduction by anybody's standards. Yes, we work with philanthropists. Yes, we welcome business partnerships. But that is not a bad thing. We all work together to achieve objectives and outcomes,
including making New Zealand predator-free by 2050. Conservation Minister Maggie Berry, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's 16 minutes past 6. The Trade Minister has apologised to the Prime Minister for his initial response to reports of trade retaliation by China over possible steel dumping here. Todd McClay's version of events has changed again. He now says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has been assessing the veracity of the allegations for the past few months. Last week, of course, Mr McClay said he didn't know anything about a Chinese organisation approaching Zespri, aside from what he'd heard in media reports.
This is extremely hypothetical. We have a newspaper story that says that there could be some form of sanction, but there's no investigation being announced in New Zealand. Some of the companies involved have said that they haven't been approached, and we also have the Chinese ambassador and embassy saying that they're not aware of it either. So certainly be seeking more information, and it's important to the government, but I think we need to be extremely careful not to get ahead of ourselves.
But then, 2 days later, Mr McClay said he was informed on the matter.
I've checked overnight into when I was in China. I did receive information from the embassy that an industry body had made contact with a New Zealand company in China, raising some concerns. Our embassy subsequently has checked this with MOFCOM, which is the equivalent of the Chinese Ministry of Trade. They've said they have no knowledge of it and they have denied it.
The Trade Minister, Todd McClay, who declined our invitation to be interviewed on Checkpoint tonight. A short time ago, I spoke to Labour leader Andrew Little. He told me all the backtracking means Mr McClay isn't up to the job and it's time for him to go.
Well, I think it's pretty stunning. We had a week of abject denials last week, that there was nothing to see here, there was no threat. Now we get a statement today that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade have been dealing with this over several months. So either somebody in the ministry hasn't been keeping his minister informed, or the minister hasn't been across the issue, and either way the Prime Minister has been misled. And all of those things, only the minister can be held responsible and is responsible, and I think this is such an egregious failure on his part, he can no longer continue in the role.
There is another possibility, isn't there? And I'm fixing on to a word that was used early on, and that's the hypothetical word. So in other words, there were hypothetical discussions about a hypothetical response from China, and no one was sure whether or not it would materialise. In which case, it remains in the corridors of the ministry rather than going to the minister. Is that possible?
Well, I just don't think it's possible that the ministry or ministry officials would be talking for what has been described as months, a hypothetical threat or risk to the trade relationship. They would only be spending that much time over that extended period of time if there was something substantial. And I just don't think the reported claims about threats being made to outfits like Zespri and Fonterra will be made without there being some substance to it.
What do you believe happened then? First of all, let's look at the threats themselves. What threats were made? Were there real threats? And did they deserve to be taken seriously?
My hunch is, just from following the reports during the course of last week and seeing the statement today, is obviously the steel industry here is concerned about dumping. They have been for some time. They've spoken to me about it. They've done what they're allowed to do, which is raise a complaint through the proper processes with Indy. That has somehow made its way to the Chinese authorities or the local embassy, and they have said, listen, we've got this trade relationship, this isn't good, and which is not, that's, like it or not, that's what Chinese often do, even to their trading partners, and I suspect that's what has happened. Maybe the Ministry of Foreign Affairs hasn't known how to deal with it diplomatically, but either way, when there's even an inkling of a threat like this, you keep the minister informed. I don't believe they wouldn't have done. And then the minister needs to keep, the Prime Minister and other senior ministers informed. This is our biggest trading partner, and the threat has been made about industries that are significant foreign exchange earners for us.
So you say you keep the minister informed. I don't believe they wouldn't have done. So you saying we're being misled here?
It doesn't stack up. That we then get, after a week of being told there's nothing to see here, yes, it was hypothetical, that we now get told this has been the subject of discussion for months within the ministry. The ministry doesn't discuss something for months without there being, some real substance to it. I just don't believe last week's denials.
And where do we stand now in terms of China's position, steel dumping, and New Zealand's response? Is there clarity around that?
Well, there's a process to go through. Even under the free trade rules, there's not meant to be dumping. You cannot, throw a heap of product at, below production cost into other markets. That is called dumping. And if that is happening, that is still a breach of WTO rules.
But how do you stand up to China? This is the issue, isn't it? And it seems to be confounding everyone, which is possibly why people were so reluctant to talk about it. How do you stand up to China without actually biting the hand that feeds? And in a very real term, that's the position we're in, isn't it?
Well, they are a member of WTO. New Zealand was one of the early countries that supported them being a member of the WTO, recognising them as a market economy. So they've got to play by the rules. And at some point, those international organisations, they've got to stand for something. The whole idea is to have a rules-based system for trade. So if they're part of the system, they've got to abide by the rules, and we've got to use the processes to ensure that they do.
And what about Todd McClay? When you call for him to resign, that's just pure politics. There's absolutely no way he's going to resign, is there?
Well, let's look at the magnitude of the issue here. So our biggest trading partner has been the subject of discussion within his ministry, a ministry that he's partially responsible for what is described as some months. Either he didn't know, in which case he did, proper Westminster system, he takes ministerial responsibility for it. That simply isn't good enough. But if he did know, it's even worse. And if he hasn't kept his Prime Minister informed, that's even worse again. Either way, any way you look at it, that cannot stand. He has to go.
22 and a half minutes past 6, it's Labour leader Andrew Little. Just after we finished the interview, I remembered we'd forgotten to ask him about something very important. It's beside me if you're watching. It's a billboard outside his office in New Plymouth, which was defaced over the weekend, rather magnificently actually, and his name and head were replaced. Are you related to Stuart Little?
I'm getting the family tree down at the moment. I'm absolutely sure. The thing we have in common is that we have a big heart. We're committed to doing good things for all good people.
Do you know who did this?
No, I can't imagine. But I have to say, when in the 2011 election campaign, I had a big metal hoarding that was taken to with an axe. So I have to say, having my face changed to Stuart Little is a lot better by comparison.
Yes, in terms of political abuse, it's at the sweeter, kinder end of the spectrum, isn't it?
Exactly. That's right. No, I'm flattered by it, I think.
Andrew Little, and if anyone knows who did that to the hoarding outside his office in New Plymouth, we'd love to hear from you. The man who brought a Waitangi Tribunal claim against the Department of Corrections says it's failing in its duty of care. Tom Hemopo is a retired probation officer and says the reoffending rates of Māori show the department is failing in its duty to rehabilitate inmates. He's taken the claim against Corrections, which is being heard this week. Te Mano Kotahi reporter Aaron Smale spoke to him.
Tom Hemopo's claim is being heard by the tribunal this week. He says that while corrections might be running a number of rehab programs in prisons, the rates for Māori reoffending are still rising.
The evidence is stark. I mean, Māori reoffending has actually gone up and not down, and no matter what program they put in place or tried to implement, it hasn't had an effect on reoffending, and that's got to be a concern, not only by Māori, but everybody.
Mr Hemapo says the programs need to be changed, otherwise they are merely ticking a box.
If you're forced to go on a program, people will attend, but they're not necessarily going to learn. I know that from first-hand experience. When I was a probation officer, people were forced, if you don't go on this program, we're going to breach you. Because of that statement, people attend, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to learn. They're only there to comply with the sentence.
While he is critical of corrections, he says the department is dealing with people who have been failed by others before they come into contact with the criminal justice system.
The problem starts long before corrections become involved, and to some extent our people have to take a certain amount of responsibility, because if you're taught right in the home, then you won't actually reoffend.
The hearing is continuing this week and will hear submissions from criminal justice experts and lawyers representing the Crown. For Checkpoint, ko Aaron Smale tēnei.
It's coming up to 26 minutes past 6. Children stripped naked, tear-gassed and strapped into mechanical devices. That is the reality of Australia's Northern Territory youth justice system. An ABC investigation set to air on television tonight includes never-before-seen footage of the tear-gassing of 6 children held in isolation at a youth detention centre in Darwin in August 2014. The ABC's Elise Worthington filed this report.
Yeah, but I've been stuck in there for how long? Have you had time out or not?
The 14-year-old boy being heard here has been held alone for 15 days in a dark, hot cell for 23 hours a day. Jake Roper has lost all sense of time and he's just been told he won't be getting out anytime soon.
Did he get through that door though? Is he actually open the doors?
The events that unfolded on the 21st of August 2014 were recorded by guards on duty at the Dondale Youth Detention Centre in Darwin.
Yeah, it's recording. It says record.
CCTV shows the boy breaking out of his cell, which has accidentally been left unlocked. Trapped inside the small enclosed concrete exercise yard of the centre's isolation wing, the frustrated boy repeatedly rams the exit door. Media reports at the time described this incident as a riot. It was said several boys escaped their cell and threatened staff with weapons. The vision obtained by Four Corners shows otherwise. The 5 other boys were locked in their cells. CCTV footage shows 2 calmly playing cards and watching as Jake tries to climb out a window.
Poke him back through.
No, they don't have to come through because while he's coming through, he'll be off balance. Otherwise a little
Eventually, the decision was made to spray tear gas into the enclosed area.
Watch out.
Oh, they're using chemicals. The security vision shows 10 sprays of tear gas into the area. The boys can be heard screaming, coughing and gasping for air. Prison officers storm through the door wearing gas masks and drag the children outside, spraying them with a hose. The incident has been the subject of 2 reports, a government-instigated independent report and another released last year by the Northern Territory Children's Commissioner. NT Corrections Minister John Elferink told Four Corners the government has learned from the incident.
It was a system that needed improvement. It was a system that had fundamental problems, which is why I've worked so hard to improve it, and it has been improved.
We still remain concerned that the response has not been as urgent as we would have liked.
The Northern Territory Children's Commissioner, Colleen Gwynn, says more needs to be done.
I would like to see a more full response and I guess some urgency and some dedicated resources thrown at this to ensure that we are never put in that situation again.
It appears the incident has not been an isolated one. Four Corners has also obtained shocking accounts of mistreatment spanning a period of 5 years, all inflicted on vulnerable children being held in the Northern Territory. Barrister John Lawrence.
They were also subjected to manhandling, handcuffing, shackling, spit-hooding, the likes of which, when I discovered this, I quite literally could not believe what I was hearing. I couldn't think for the life of me that that could occur in Australia in 2016.
That report from the ABC, and the actual report is airing in Australia tonight. Hi, John. Nathan says the SIF case is really troubling and undermines confidence in the system. The area manager has relooked at the case and admitted they got it wrong. How many other cases are there like this out there, says Nathan. Good evening, John. The collective decision of the ministry responsible SIFs not to front up to the issue on radio, RNZ this evening, is cowardly. Just the kind of response the public have come to expect, says Alan. Richard says, hi John, great to hear about the goals for bird predators. How about our native freshwater fishes being decimated by carp and trout? How about Cody dieback spread by wild pigs? There's so much to be done, and we need a deep change in public perception of what is a pest. And finally tonight, this piece of feedback: can we be poverty-free, homeless-free, asbestos-free, as well as pest-free? Good night, everyone.
RNZ News at 6:30. The Prime Minister says he still has confidence in his Trade Minister over his handling of reports of trade retaliation by China over possible steel dumping. Countdown isn't naming most of the 6 supermarkets it's closing yet, but says some will be replaced. The government has adopted the goal of New Zealand becoming predator-free by 2050. And a woman who the police thought may have been trapped in a house destroyed by fire in Whanganui has been found safe. More news and weather at 7.
DJ Shadow and the Avalanches are both sample-based artists back after long absences with new albums. I'm Nick Bollinger and I'll be discussing DJ Shadow's The Mountain Will Fall and the Avalanches' Wildflowers in the Sampler. And I'll be reviewing local blues from King Leo and an album full of bittersweet longing from Lawrence Arabia.